There is a frequency that has been broadcasting from a point on the Norwegian coast for 11 years. Not music, not voices, not static. A signal, precise. Repeating every 43 seconds, day after day. Through blizzards that buried the surrounding land under 6 feet of snow. Through polar nights that lasted 3 months at a stretch. Through years in which no human being has set foot within 12 kilometers of the source. 11 years of a signal that, by every account, should have died within weeks of the first winter. Because the people who built that transmitter, the people who were supposed to maintain it, power it, keep it alive, vanished in February of 2013. All 6 of them. Gone. No bodies. No distress call. No trail. The outpost was found exactly as they had left it. Meals half-eaten. A logbook open to a page dated 3 days before anyone noticed they were missing. A coffee cup on the desk, the liquid inside frozen solid against the ceramic. And the transmitter still running, still broadcasting, still sending a signal that to this day no one has been able to decode. This is the story of research station Halvard 7. And the closer investigators got to the truth, the more they understood why some signals should never be answered. Before we go further, you need to understand something. This is not a ghost story. It is not a conspiracy theory dressed up in dramatic lighting. What happened at Halvard 7 has been reviewed by the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, by 3 independent research teams, by investigative journalists, and by radio engineers from 2 different countries. Every one of them has reached the same conclusion. They do not know what happened. They do not know how the transmitter is still running. And they do not know what the signal means. What they do know, what the documents confirm, what the photographs show, what the audio recordings captured when investigators finally reached the station 14 months after the disappearance, is deeply, persistently wrong. Not wrong in a way you can point to and name. Wrong in the way a room feels wrong when you walk into it and sense, before you see anything, that something is different. Something has been moved. Something has been in here that shouldn't have been. That feeling, that instinct that every animal carries, the thing that tells you to run before your brain knows why, that is the feeling that every person who has ever come close to Halvard 7 has reported. Every single one. We're going to go inside that station together. We're going to go through the documents, the photographs, the recordings, the testimonies. And by the end of this, you are going to feel something you cannot fully explain. That is not a promise. That is a warning. The Finnmark coast of northern Norway is one of the most desolate stretches of land in the developed world. In winter, the sun does not rise for months. What light exists comes filtered through layers of cloud, gray and flat and directionless, so that the land and the sky appear to be made of the same material. The sea freezes close to the shore. The wind comes in off the Barents Sea in waves you feel in your chest before you hear them. There are no trees this far north. No shelter. The tundra rolls in long, featureless undulations toward the inland plateau, and in winter it all disappears under snow that is compressed by wind into a surface that looks almost like concrete. Still. Featureless. Extending to every horizon, Halvard 7 was established in 2009 as a joint atmospheric monitoring station, funded partly by the Norwegian government, partly by a private environmental research consortium based in Oslo. Its purpose was quiet, technical, and largely unglamorous, measuring wind patterns, atmospheric pressure readings, particulate matter in the upper air. The kind of data that feeds into climate models that nobody reads except specialists. The station itself was a cluster of 4 modular prefabricated buildings arranged around a central equipment room. Insulated walls. Triple glazed windows. A diesel generator supplemented by a wind turbine mounted on a 30-foot mast. It was designed to be operated by a crew of 6, 2 atmospheric scientists, 2 technicians, a station manager, and a logistics coordinator responsible for supplies, communication schedules, and equipment maintenance. The nearest town was Mehamn. Population, roughly 900 people, 70 kilometers away across terrain that in winter becomes effectively impassable without specialist equipment. In other words, if something went wrong at Halvard 7, there was no quick help coming. This was considered acceptable. Stations like this operate all over the Arctic. The protocols are well established: daily check-in calls, emergency beacons, scheduled resupply visits every 8 weeks. Halvard 7 had operated without incident for 4 years before the disappearance. 4 years of routine data. 4 years of check-in calls. 4 years of weather reports and equipment logs and resupply manifests. Then, in the first week of February 2013, the check-in calls stopped. The crew rotation at Halvard 7 ran on a schedule of 6 months on, 3 months off. The team in place during the winter of 2012-2013 had arrived in October and was due to rotate out in April. Their names matter here, not because knowing them makes the disappearance more solvable, but because it matters that they were people, that they had histories and personalities and reasons to be there. Station manager Einar Strand, 44, 14 years of experience in remote research logistics. His daughter had just turned 9. He kept a photograph of her taped to the wall above his bunk. Atmospheric scientists Dr. Marte Lund, 38, published 12 peer-reviewed papers on Arctic wind dynamics, and Dr. Jonas Fleischer, 31, on his first winter posting, reportedly cautious and methodical in his work. Senior technician Peel Hagen, 52, known in professional circles for keeping equipment running in conditions that would have broken most machines. Junior technician Sigrid Breivik, 27, 6 months out of her technical certification, younger than anyone else at the station by 3 years. Logistics coordinator Tor Erik Moen, 48, the de facto cook, supply warden, and communication officer. His check-in calls were described by the receiving operator in Mehamn as always punctual, always brief, always calm. The last confirmed check-in from Tor Erik Moen was January 31st, 2013, at 08:15 local time. He reported nothing unusual. Mild instrument drift on one of the upper air pressure sensors. Wind speeds elevated but within expected range. Fuel reserves adequate. The team was well. The next scheduled check-in was February 3rd. It did not come. The receiving operator in Mehamn, a civil servant named Say Christofferson, followed protocol, waited 12 hours, attempted contact, received no response. Waited another 12, attempted again. Nothing. On February 5th, she escalated the report to the Norwegian Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Bod. Due to weather, a severe blizzard system had moved in across the Finnmark Plateau. The first rescue attempt could not be launched until February 9th. What they found when they arrived would be studied, debated, and argued over for the next decade. The rescue team consisted of 4 people, 2 search and rescue specialists, and 2 Norwegian Coastal Administration officers. They arrived at Halvard 7 by snowmobile at approximately 14 Sellet on February 9th, during the narrow window of gray twilight that passed for daylight this far north in February. The first thing they noted was that the lights were on. Not emergency lighting, not backup systems, all internal lighting, running normally, as if someone had simply left every switch in the building flipped to on. The second thing they noted was the transmitter mast, the signal light on the equipment housing at its base, a red LED indicator that showed when the system was actively broadcasting, was lit. The station was sending. The rescue team leader, whose testimony is recorded in the official investigation documents, described the approach like this: "We came over the last rise and saw the station lit up in the dark. And the first thought you have is relief, there are lights, Someone is there, everyone is fine. And then you get close enough to see there is no movement, no shadow in a window, no figure coming out to meet you. And the relief just drains away. They entered through the main airlock. The interior temperature was maintained, the heating system was running, coats hung on hooks by the door, boots lined up in pairs below them, 6 pairs. All 6 pairs. The central common room held a table with the remnants of a meal, a pot on the stove, contents solidified. 4 cups around the table, 2 with coffee, 2 with what appeared to be tea. The logbook was open on the desk in the adjacent communication room, the last entry dated January 29th, 2 days before the final check-in call. The entry was unremarkable. Weather data. Equipment readings. A note that Dr. Fleischer had repaired a faulty seal on the north-facing instrument housing. Nothing that suggested anything was wrong. The sleeping quarters were undisturbed. Beds made, or partially made, in the way of people who had simply not gotten around to finishing the task, not in the way of people who had left in a hurry. Personal items were present. Phones, laptops, one e-reader, a paperback novel open face down on a bunk. Einar Strand's photograph of his daughter was still taped above his bed. There was no sign of struggle, no blood. No broken equipment, no indication of carbon monoxide leak or other atmospheric hazard. The rescue team had carried monitors. There were no footprints in the snow outside the station beyond the immediate entrance area, which showed the scuff and compression of normal daily foot traffic, but nothing recent, nothing that suggested anyone had walked away. 6 people had been in this station. Every object they owned was still here. Every garment they would have needed to survive outside was still here. And they were simply not present. The rescue team searched for 3 hours. They found nothing. What they did find, what one of the Coastal Administration officers noticed almost by accident while checking the equipment room, was that the transmitter was not broadcasting on any frequency that Halvard 7 was authorized to use. The station's assigned frequencies were for standard atmospheric data relay, scientific telemetry, routine, mundane. The signal currently broadcasting from Halvard 7 was on a different frequency entirely. One that, as far as anyone could determine, Halvard 7's equipment was not capable of generating. The investigation that followed was led jointly by the Norwegian Police Service and the Norwegian Research Council. It lasted 19 months and produced a 340-page report that concluded, in its final summary, that the disappearance of the 6 crew members of Halvard 7 remained unexplained. Let me tell you what the investigators found. Not the summary. The details. Because the summary does not tell you about the secondary logbook. Every research station of this type keeps 2 logging systems, a primary digital log and a physical backup log in case of system failure. The rescue team had found the physical backup log, the one on the desk with the January 29th entry. What they had not immediately found was the digital log. When investigators accessed the station's computer system 2 weeks later, after the site had been secured and technical specialists had been flown in, they discovered that the digital log had been active significantly longer than the physical backup. The digital log's last entry was February 2nd, the day before the check-in stopped. The entry was made at 03:17 in the morning. By Einar Strand. The log entry was 11 words long. In Norwegian, it translates directly as, "It came back." We can hear it under the floor. That is the entire entry. No further context, no additional information. The log was closed after those 11 words and never opened again. What is under the floor of Halvard 7? Technically nothing. The station buildings are mounted on raised insulated platforms, standard construction for Arctic environments, to prevent the heat from the buildings melting the permafrost beneath them. The gap between the floor and the frozen ground is roughly 40 centimeters. An access panel in the equipment room allows entry for maintenance of the heating pipes that run beneath the structure. Investigators opened that panel. The heating pipes were intact. The insulation was intact. The permafrost beneath was intact. But in the insulation material, pressed against the underside of the floor in the area directly beneath the communication desk, where Einar Strand would have sat to make his check-in calls, investigators found something. Scratches. In the insulation foam. Not random. Not the marks of an animal. Characters. Arranged in rows. 43 characters per row. 43. The same number as the interval, in seconds, of the signal still broadcasting from the transmitter above. The characters were not in any standard alphabet, not Norwegian, not Latin, not Cyrillic, not any recognized script. The forensic linguists who examined the photographs produced by investigators could agree on one thing: the marks appeared to have been made deliberately, systematically, and by someone with a clear intention. Someone who knew what they were writing. They could not agree on what it said, because none of them had ever seen anything like it. But what they could confirm, from the depth and character of the scratches, from the angle and consistent pressure of the marks, was that whoever had made them had been lying on their stomach in a 40-centimeter gap in freezing conditions, pressed against the underside of a floor in the dark, for a very long time. Let that land. The investigation attempted to establish a timeline. When had the crew members been active? When had behavior first deviated from normal? The digital systems offered some evidence. The security camera inside the communication room, a routine installation for monitoring equipment status, recorded continuously to a hard drive. Investigators recovered the footage. For the first 3 months of the crew's posting, the footage showed exactly what you would expect: ordinary daily activity. Strand at the desk for check-in calls. Lund and Fleischer moving through on their way to and from the science modules. Routine. Then, in the second week of January, 3 weeks before the disappearance, something changed. It didn't change dramatically. It changed almost imperceptibly. But once you know to look for it, the investigators who reviewed the footage said you cannot unsee it. The crew began gathering in the communication room at night. Not every night. 3 times in the first week. Then 5 times. Then, in the final days of footage, every night, at intervals that became more regular as the days progressed. They would come in 1 or 2 at a time and stand or sit near the communication desk. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for an hour or more. Sometimes they did not speak to each other at all. They simply stood there, facing the equipment rack where the transmitter controls were housed. In the final 3 nights of footage, January 30th, 31st, and February 1st, all 6 crew members were present together. Every night. Gathered in the communication room in the small hours of the morning. Standing. Listening. The last footage showed the 6 of them standing in the room at 02:58 on the morning of February 2nd. Then, at 03:02, 15 minutes before Einar Strand's final log entry, they all turned and walked out. The camera recorded an empty room for the next 7 days until the rescue team arrived. Nobody walked back in. Here is where the story becomes something else, because the investigation into Halvard 7 eventually reached a detail that was classified for 3 years before a parliamentary disclosure request forced its release in 2016. The transmitter at Halvard 7, the one broadcasting on an unregistered frequency, the one that should not have had the capability to produce the signal it was producing, was not, in any meaningful sense, producing the signal on its own. The technical analysis, conducted by radio engineers from the Norwegian Communications Authority, established that the station's transmitter was functioning as a relay. It was receiving a signal, amplifying it, and sending it back out. Where the original signal was coming from, the engineers could not determine. Their directional analysis suggested a source deep beneath the station's immediate area, but the geology of the region, they noted in their report, should have made signal transmission from underground essentially impossible. Rock and permafrost do not carry radio waves. They absorb them. And yet, the signal the station was relaying had characteristics that the engineers described, carefully and with obvious discomfort, as unlike any transmission they had encountered from a conventional source. The modulation pattern, the way the signal was structured, did not match any known transmission protocol. Military, civilian, or experimental. It matched nothing in the record. But it matched something else. A researcher working on the investigation, a junior analyst whose name does not appear prominently in the official report, had been tasked with reviewing historical radio monitoring data from the region, looking for anything anomalous in the years before Halvard 7 was established. She found it. The same signal. Or something indistinguishable from it, appearing intermittently in the monitoring data going back to 1987. Long before there was any station at that location. Long before there was any transmission equipment within 50 kilometers. A signal that had been rising from beneath that stretch of Norwegian tundra, on and off, for at least 26 years before the crew of Halvard 7 disappeared. And possibly based on fragments of earlier monitoring records that the analyst tracked down from a decommissioned Norwegian military listening post for much longer than that. The signal was not created by Halvard 7. Halvard 7 was built on top of it. In April of 2014, 14 months after the disappearance, 8 months after the investigation formally concluded with no answers, a team of 3 journalists from a Norwegian investigative publication called Faktisk traveled to Halvard 7. The station had been placed in a maintained but unoccupied status by the Research Council, equipment left running on automated systems, no crew present, a scheduled review every 18 months. Access required official authorization, which the journalists obtained through a Freedom of Information request. They spent 2 nights at the station. All 3 of them were physically healthy when they arrived and when they left. No injuries, no medical incidents, but all 3 of them produced detailed written accounts of what they experienced, and all 3 accounts share elements that none of them had discussed with each other before writing independently. The first journalist described a persistent feeling, beginning on the first night, that someone was moving in the rooms adjacent to wherever she was standing. She never saw anyone. When she moved toward the sound, and there was a sound, she insists, a very low-frequency vibration more felt than heard, it stopped and resumed somewhere else. The second journalist described waking at precisely 03:17 on both nights, a time he confirmed against his phone, which he had not set an alarm on, with a conviction so absolute it felt physical that something was directly beneath him, in the crawl space under the floor. He did not open the access panel. He is clear on this point. He sat on the edge of his bunk until morning, and he did not move. The third journalist, a senior editor who had requested to come specifically because he did not believe in anything the others had experienced at similar locations in the past, wrote in his account, "I am not a superstitious person. I do not believe in hauntings or presences or anything that cannot be measured. What I experienced at Halvard 7 did not change that belief. I still do not believe in those things. But I am no longer certain that my disbelief is adequate protection against them." He declined to elaborate. When the journalists played back the audio recordings they had made throughout both nights, standard journalistic practice, continuous recording for transcription purposes, they found something on the audio from the second night that none of them had heard while it was happening. Under their voices, beneath the ambient sounds of the building, threaded through the silences between their words, like something woven into the gaps, the signal. Coming up through the floor. In 2019, a geophysicist named Dr. Astrid Vangen at the University of Troms published a paper in a respected academic journal on a phenomenon she had been studying for 6 years. She called it subsonic geological resonance, the capacity of certain unusual geological formations, specifically combinations of rock type, porosity, and underground water movement, to produce sustained low-frequency vibrations that can propagate upward through permafrost and interact with man-made structures in unexpected ways. The paper itself was technical, dry, methodical. It was not about Halvard 7, but in the acknowledgement section, the back matter that almost no one reads, Dr. Vangen thanked the Norwegian Research Council for access to geological survey data from the Finnmark coast, and she thanked, specifically, the investigation team of the Halvard 7 incident for the signal recordings that had formed, she wrote, a critical part of her initial data set. A journalist noticed this. Contacted Dr. Vangen. Dr. Vangen agreed to speak on the record once, and only briefly. She confirmed that the signal from Halvard 7 was consistent with the resonance phenomenon she had studied. She confirmed that the geological formation beneath the station's location was, in her words, unusual in ways that are not fully understood. She confirmed that low-frequency resonance of this type could, in theory, affect human perception, inducing feelings of unease, paranoia, the sensation of presence, even auditory hallucinations at sustained exposure. She was asked whether she believed this explained what had happened to the crew. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "It explains the feelings they may have experienced. It explains, perhaps, certain behaviors. It does not explain the symbols under the floor, because those required someone to be under the floor to make them. It does not explain the signal being broadcast on equipment incapable of producing it. It does not explain why 6 trained professionals, rational, experienced people, walked out of a heated building into the polar night without their coats, in February, without leaving footprints." She was asked if she had any other theories. "No," she said. "I have learned to be very careful about theories for which there is no adequate evidence. What I have instead is a data point that I cannot explain, from a location I would not return to, connected to a signal that is still broadcasting." She ended the call. The signal from Halvard 7 is still broadcasting. As of the latest confirmed monitoring, it has not changed. Not in frequency, not in interval, not in the structure of its pattern. 43 seconds. Again and again, something down there is still sending, and somewhere out there, something may still be receiving. The bodies of Einar Strand, Marte Lund, Jonas Fleischer, Pil Hagen, Sigrid Breivik, and Tor Erik Moen have never been found. The search was extensive, it was thorough. In the spring of 2013, when the snow retreated, aerial surveys covered hundreds of square kilometers. Ground teams searched on foot. The sea was monitored. Nothing. The Norwegian government officially classified the case as an unresolved mass disappearance in 2015. The families of the crew members have not accepted this. Einar Strand's daughter, who was 9 when her father disappeared and is now in her early 20s, has spoken publicly about the case several times. She has said that she does not want an explanation. She has said that, having read the investigation documents released under disclosure, she is no longer certain she would survive one. She visits the case files, she has said, only to remind herself that her father was real, that he existed, that he sat in that room and made that log entry and heard something moving beneath the floor, and that whatever he experienced in those final days, whatever changed in him and the people around him, he was still a person who loved his daughter and kept her photograph on the wall above his bunk until the moment he was gone. The photograph was collected as evidence. It has since been returned to the family. Halvard 7 is still standing. The automated systems continue to function. The transmitter continues to broadcast. No research institution has applied to reopen the station. The Norwegian Research Council's position in official correspondence is that the facility remains available for resumption of operations pending safety review. In practice, no safety review has been scheduled. No crew has been assembled. The station sits on its insulated platform above the frozen coast, lit in the polar dark, sending its signal into the Arctic air. 43 seconds. Again and again and again. If you were to go there tonight, if you were to cross the tundra in the dark and approach through the snow and press your ear to the floor of the communication room, you would hear it. coming up through the permafrost, through the insulation, through the wood and metal and whatever is scratched into the underside of the floor in characters that no linguist has identified. A vibration, barely sound, more a presence than a frequency, like something far below that has been there for a very long time, that knows you're listening, that has always known. Lone, looping, fades. The frozen outpost that kept broadcasting after everyone disappeared. This documentary is presented as a fictional narrative inspired by real atmospheric research programs, historical Arctic disappearances, and documented anomalous radio phenomena. All named individuals and specific station designations are fictional. The phenomena described are composites of real scientific concepts including infrasound-induced psychological effects, subsonic geological resonance, and documented cases of remote station disappearances. The signal is imagined. The feeling it leaves behind is yours. End card narration. If you made it to the end of this, thank you. And I'm sorry. There is a small possibility you will hear something tonight in the quiet between sounds that you will not be able to name. I would tell you it's nothing, but I'd rather be honest with you than comfortable. The next video is already queued. I'd suggest watching it with the lights on,